Yeah. So let me go ahead and since I'm hosting this session, I'll introduce you guys and give you an overview of what we're going to be doing today. Does that sound good?
Okay. Right.
Okay. So it looks like normally we have about 60 people. We have fewer people, it looks like, logged in today than usual. Maybe it's just beautiful summer days around the world. But anyhow, I do want to go ahead and welcome you all here. This may end up being a shorter session because it looks like we have about 37 participants. But we'll see how today goes. So let me just first remind you that today's session is about managing large research projects, including your dissertation. We have three very distinguished presenters with us today. We have Talia Bauer. She's the Cameron Professor of Management and also the Area Director at Cortland State University. You guys are probably familiar with her work on fairness perceptions and also relationships at work. We also have Rajiv Nag. He's an assistant professor at Drexel University. You may also be familiar with his work on organizational learning and knowledge and also on strategic change. And last but not least, of course, I'd like to introduce Tim Quigley to you. He is an assistant professor at University of Georgia, and his very interesting work is on CEOs, including things like CEO deaths and also what happens when a CEO stays on as board chair after they stop being CEO. So anyhow, thanks again. The idea I have for today's session is that we'll have about 5 to 10 minutes of presentations by each of our presenters going in order, alphabetical order from their last name. So that would be Bauer, Nag, and then Quigley. And then as soon as that presenter is done, I'll open it up to questions for about, say, 5 or 10 minutes. And about, for that particular person, and then we'll move on to the next presenter, again, have some Q&A for that presenter, and so on. And then at the very end, we'll spend those remaining minutes where you guys can ask questions of any of our three presenters. So I would like to go ahead and get started. So again, everybody, please give a warm welcome to Talia.
Share my screen went away, and now I have upload in progress. Can anybody hear me? Hi, does anybody hear me?
Talia, the way you can tell that
Talia, I heard you briefly. This is Rajiv.
Can you see in the chat section, people are responding yes, that they can hear you?
So all of a sudden, all I can see on my screen is upload in progress by Rajiv, and everything else disappeared.
Okay.
So let me also say that what we're finding works best is instead of uploading your slides, to instead just have your PowerPoint open and then share your screen.
Maybe the video is taking a lot of
uploading slides. You can, if Rajiv, if you'll cancel that,
megabits,
because we've been finding that it
just
really
like what happened in
work.
Skype.
Oh, well, there it is, but.
Yeah, so that's taking over my screen, and I can't share my screen. Okay, we're in business now. All right, can we change the order and just go with number 2 while I work this out? Or can you see my screen?
Rajiv,
No?
do you want? No. Rajiv, do you want to go ahead and go? Or we might be able to see yours in just a second.
All of a sudden, it's wanting to download a new patch.
Oh.
Yes. What is it?
Davis, if you could help her out, that would be great. And then, and Rajiv, do you mind going ahead and going first?
Breaking up. I didn't hear anything up after Rajiv, you.
Rajiv, do you mind going first?
That's fine. If Talia is okay with it.
Yeah, I think so.
Yep.
Okay, so this is Rajiv here, Rajiv Nag, and you know, I have the honor to say that I'm you know, professionally I've kind of touched, I've been in touch with Craig, Tim, and Chris. Hello, can you hear me now? Okay, hi everybody. So I'm Rajiv here, Rajiv Nag, and I am currently in Philadelphia. I work with Drexel University, and it's an honor to be here. And sorry for the technical glitches, but I just wanted to check if you're able to see my slides. Okay, so I have kind of taken a two-pronged approach towards this talk, this brief talk. I'll start by showing a few slides that sort of are precursors to actually managing the dissertation project. So, in the sense that, you know, how do you even go about a dissertation? And I do want to give a caveat that you know, there are people in this group right now who have had much more success and who have done much more impressive work than I have. But what
I'm so sorry. It looks like we're having a lot of technical difficulties today. I'm not sure why. Since we lost one of our presenters, I'm wondering if one of our, oh, there we go. He might be back. Oh, okay. It looks like we might be okay now. Again, I apologize.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I don't know what happened. So I'll just quickly share some ideas about how to go about a dissertation. I just want to give a caveat. There are people in our group who have had much more success, and they can share a lot more insights. But here are a few from what I have learned the hard way. Just a brief Stephen Barley's article that I had recommended is really useful, because if you really get into that article, which I hope you have, it shows you how even a very leading researcher like Stephen Barley had to go through so many hoops to get acceptance into the hospitals, into the radiology labs. How difficult it was for him to overcome the initial trust issues. And when I reread this article after several years, I kind of related my own experiences in the dissertation, and it kind of resonated with that. And just to give you a brief background about my dissertation, which I did back in 2004 to 2006, I studied, like Barley, I chose a context that was not very popular at that time. Like everybody in MIT at that time, as Barley said, was studying computers. Barley chose radiology, and similarly, I chose an industry. And I sort of give credit to Donald Hambrick for this, who suggested that choose something that nobody's interested in. And I started studying the metal foundries industry in Pennsylvania and other northeastern states. These are small firms, small 100-person, 100-employee firms, or 10 to 100-employee firms that basically melt metal to cast different products, like anywhere from sewer covers to automotive parts. So, but initially I too faced trust issues, and I had to really get into this industry. And by basically becoming a participant observer, I visited a lot of foundries, spent a lot of time attending their trade associations, learning the industry language, meeting a lot of people, explaining them what I was setting out to do, building that initial trust and understanding. But it wasn't overnight. It took me at least 6 months to get that acceptance. And something like, in case of Barley, it took a little bit longer, I guess, but, he was looking, again, at something that was having, some of the hospitals, for example, some of the radiology labs had histories with journalists posing as researchers and then writing critical articles. I didn't have that kind of a thing, but I was studying an industry which was basically going through a lot of turbulence, because, as you know, the U.S. manufacturing sector has been facing a lot of challenges, environmental challenges, trade challenges, competition from low labor cost countries like China, India, and Mexico. So in any case, managing a large research project and dissertation, it is obviously a complex exercise, but it requires perseverance. And I'll quickly go to the slides here. Not sure if I can, how do you, let me see. Okay, yes. So I'm syncing the slide, I have synced the slide, not synced. Let me see if it works. Yes. So the way the mnemonic or the symbolism that I want to sort of address the sort of present your dissertation project, it's almost like you being an entrepreneur. And this is like a new venture for you, and the products will be the papers that come out of the dissertation. So you are the entrepreneur, And you have to build a support network around yourself, and your competitors are not other scholars. They're actually going to be your friends. Your only competitor, as I see it, is yourself. You're up against yourself. Like any entrepreneurial startup, you need a good idea, but you need more than just a good idea. You need a strong board of directors, a strong set of VCs, in this case your dissertation committee, other members, faculty members, and senior doctoral students and junior doctoral students in your department, and maybe faculty members, industry specialists outside the department who should be interested. And in my case, I succeeded in developing I got access to the foundry industry through a professor in the College of Engineering who was quite well known in that industry, and I started traveling and visiting foundries with him, and that's how I started building my, my credibility in the industry. You need supportive stakeholders to sort of see you through the twists and turns of this process. And of course, you need some luck. We need luck in a lot of things. What about an idea? How do you get an idea? There are various ways to look at to sort of arrive at ideas, and it's still, let me tell you this from my own experience. Even a dissertation idea is not a done idea. It actually evolves even after your dissertation. But to start with, you need to have an idea at some point of time. If you're in a doctoral program early on, start thinking about different issues, different phenomena, different things that sort of interest you, problems, questions. There are standard procedures that are advised in doctoral programs. Read the articles, read the limitations and future research sections of articles, but that's not all. At the end of the day, your gut feel that develops, your intuition that develops over a period of time as to what is important, what could be important in the coming years, just like an entrepreneur. Not entrepreneur, all entrepreneurial startup ideas come from hardcore rational analysis. A lot of it is your intuition, your gut feel, what is driven by what you feel is interesting, what's going to keep you engaged in the coming years. I kind of use a sort of a graph to sort of show how do you even evaluate whether an idea is worth pursuing. And I see kind of three dimensions, so to speak. One is the emotive dimension. And these are not in any particular order, by the way. The emotive dimension is, do you feel good about the idea? Do you feel excited? Do you and maybe your friends, your family members, your colleagues, do they feel good about the idea? Wow, that gives me, that's something important. That's something I like to do. A lot of the times I've seen people pursuing ideas that are very important, but at the end of the day, they themselves don't like that idea, that research idea, research question. I don't know how far they go with that. Maybe in this present day and age when we are kind of always under the gun to publish and publish and publish, maybe that's the way to do, publish something that is publishable. But at the end of the day, ask yourself this question: why are you in this profession? Why are you doing this research? What is the opportunity cost? And you will start finding that this emotional quotient, so to speak, or the emotive dimension is important to sort of give you meaning and that persistence. The second is cognitive. This is evaluative completely. You have to get feedback from your committee members, your colleagues, look at what is being published, what is in press, and figure out whether this idea of yours has any hope of breaking new ground. If you're simply repeating that stuff, at least in management, if you're simply repeating past research, chances of being accepted in the top journals are limited. Although there have been several calls for replication studies. But to be honest, our journals, as you know, value the importance of novelty and importance. And finally, pragmatic. This is perhaps where some of us falter, which is this idea doable within a certain amount of time, fixed amount of time? I've seen, I myself was, almost about to fall in the trap of biting something that would be much bigger than what I could actually manage to do. This is where a committee comes into the picture, and they sort of discipline you, help you shape and sort of circumscribe your dissertation idea, something that's doable within a year or so, maybe a year and a half, because ultimately you have to go to the market and present your research. You can't just keep on doing a dissertation idea. And the dissertation is not the end point. It is actually the beginning point of a larger research program. So see it that way. I will stop at this stage, and let me know if you have any questions.
Rajiv, are you still there?
Hello, I am. I am there.
Rajiv, so I think a few people have asked questions. If you would just
Yes. I am typing. I typed one. Yes.
Oh, okay. You can actually just respond. It's easier to just respond with the microphone.
Yes. Right. So thank you, Chris. But I thought Talia was presenting. That's why I muted myself. But I'll quickly answer the questions. Sophie, you asked, are there any common barriers that you see doctoral students coming up against? I think that's a very good question. Some of the common barriers are committee management. How do you manage the committee? Remember, professors have their own compunctions, their own limitations, their own stresses. They're not just, please keep this in mind. Professors are great people. They're there to help you, but at the same time, they have their own work. So we doctoral students, especially people who are in the middle of their dissertation, they think that they're the center of the universe. And everybody should be there to help them. That's not always the case. So you have to sort of help your committee help you. So keep them informed from time to time. One of the most common pitfalls, and I must say I was guilty of this initially, is that you tend to go into a cave and you don't inform the committee about what's happening, the pluses and minuses, the challenges. And that's when problems start piling up. So keep the information channels open. Please, somehow in our society, and I don't want to generalize across cultures, across countries, but at least in the sort of the Western society, owning up on failures is not very common. But if you have failed in meeting a certain milestone, or if you worry that you would fail meeting a certain milestone, inform your committee beforehand with enough time at hand. Ask their help. They also have a stake in your success. Trust your committee. And so there's one step before that. Build a committee that you know will help you, that will work with you. So that's a common problem. The second problem is, and I'll start with the second most important problem that I think, and again, I have been guilty of this, is too much search, little execution. What this means is we tend to to expend too much of our energy and time searching for literatures, searching for papers, searching for articles, as if that is work. No. At some point in time, you have to stop your search and start executing, start working. Barley's article again is important here because he was very particular. He said he spent more time out there in the field taking taking notes like an ethnographer. I'm sure he had done his studies, his research, but he went there with an open mind. He was generally had a very broad research question. So sometimes we doctoral students tend to spend too much time preparing for the dissertation research than actually carrying out the dissertation research. So these are at least the two common barriers. Let me see. Now, Erica said, will your slides be available on the Brightspace site for reference? I'll refer that question to Chris. I personally don't have any issues with it. But, if you use it, these are not, this is not I don't have a copyright on this, but, just, follow whatever is required in terms of, acknowledging authorship. Okay, so Susan, is there any one doctoral field, student practice, is there any one doctoral field advantage over any other in business, in your opinion? That's a very large question, Susan. In business, of course, there are several disciplines, like there's finance, marketing, operations, of course, management, and within management you have OB, you have strategy, you have organizational theory, you have supply chain management, and so on and so forth. Within management, again, OB has its own hot topics, strategy has its own hot topics, and thankfully, unlike the fashion industry, our topics don't change that often. That said, there is, I wouldn't say that there are certain topics that, there will be some areas that, of course, you will find out yourself that you will see that if you take a last 5-year scan of articles in the top journals in your particular discipline, you will see what are some of the important questions being raised. And so there are sort of waves of research. So for example, in strategy, there was a certain wave of research in the 90s to the 2000s on the resource-based view and soon after that, dynamic capabilities. In the early 90s, there was research on knowledge management. So there are these waves. So you have to sort of catch a wave, but at the same time, choose a wave that is going to last for some, because eventually you have to plan for your second dissertation, so to speak, which is your tenure track as an assistant professor. So you have to keep yourself productive. You have to keep the editorial boards in mind as to who are the people who are in the editorial board, what kind of research are they representing. That kind of gives you a flavor of where is the journal headed towards. Who's the editor? Sometimes it's the editor who sort of sets the agenda. Okay, Chris, let me know when to stop because I can go on and on. I don't want to take time from Talia and Tim.
Actually, now it's probably a good time to switch over. And actually, what I've done for all of you who have asked questions here, I've taken a note of those questions, and what I'll do is during the end where we have more of an open Q&A for all the presenters, I'll just repeat those questions. Okay?
Sure. Great idea. So I'm muting my microphone.
Yes, please. And oh. Hmm. Oh my gosh.
Should I go on, Chris, or no?
Yeah, I'm still trying to see. Oh, I'm trying to figure out what's going on with Talia.
Yeah, I can't see her now. Yes, I can't see Tim and Talia. Both of them, yeah. Susan Prattis is asking, are there certain areas or that are more marketable than others? If you look from and Liuha mentioned data scientists. Yeah, of course, in that seems to be a very hot profession. But within academia, it's hard to say. Of course, finance and accounting positions in business schools, I would say, occur more frequently than positions in the other disciplines. Their pay scales also tend to be higher. But the intake, I don't know exactly because I've not been associated with these departments. The kind of requirements for getting into the finance and accounting PhD programs are very different. So again, that's. But from a management perspective, as I said, there is no one set of ideas that is hot as such. It's too broad an umbrella, and we are thankful that is not the case.
Actually, at
Piali,
this point,
yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Because it doesn't look. I mean, I'm just not sure what's going on with Talia. So, but I know that Tim is ready to go. So,
Okay, go ahead.
so perhaps we can move on to Tim. Tim, if you're ready.
Sure.
I'm good to go. So let me just get the screen share here. Let's hopefully that will work. All right. Hopefully that presentation is coming through okay. And maybe if somebody in the group can just let me know if they can see my slides. Excellent. All right. So we're gonna go from here. Happy to be here today. I appreciate Craig Crossland asked me to be involved in this, and I was happy to do it. But when I was asked about to talk about this specific topic, I kind of thought a little bit about sort of what does it mean, this idea of managing large research projects, and in particular, probably a lot of folks on here thinking about their dissertation in particular. And so it had me thinking back to my own dissertation, and the work that's come from it. In that particular project, my dissertation, I had 60 years of data, 2 different data sets running back decades. The end result was about 18,000 firm years of data. At some point in the process, I had at least 10 different RAs, undergrads, that were helping me gather data in order to make it all happen. And it was quite an undertaking. And looking back at it, I think I learned quite a bit from that process. I certainly didn't execute that process as smoothly as I might today, but I learned quite a bit from that process. And so I'll try and share some of that stuff with you today. And so as I think about sort of how to package that, I kind of think in terms of kind of 3 big motivating factors or goals that probably all of us have as scholars, whether we're doc students now or early career professors or even later in our careers, looking to get promoted to full professor. I think these motivations are still here in some form. I suppose the first one modifies just a little bit depending on where we are in our career. But this idea, we want to graduate, we want to get the dissertation done, and I'll talk maybe most generically in terms of the dissertation. We want to get the dissertation done. We want to get a job. We want to get published, and ultimately, once we get a job, get tenure. Second, we want our research to be productive. We want to find cool results, tell interesting stories, and do the things that we really enjoy, kind of tied to the research. And as part of that, we want to be efficient, so we can do lots of research, get lots of publications, and avoid mistakes. I mentioned that third one, and I think it's important not to underestimate that last point. So here on the slide is a recent headline just from the last week: "Study linking authoritarianism to conservatives retracted," from a journal. If it's too small to read there, the call out, says the sort of the key line. Researchers say they read the data backwards. They miscoded a particular variable and read it opposite of what it should have been. The relationship was completely opposite what they expected or what they reported. This became headlines and was fodder for the various political campaigns going on in recent months. And now they're having to backpedal from that position, which is quite embarrassing. So we all want to avoid that sort of thing. We want our research to make news, but not in this way. In another case, there's some economists that messed up a formula in Excel, just made a simple mistake, and their results became debate about this deficit spending versus austerity during the election a few years back. And some claim it was actually a driver that led to the massive budget cuts in some countries, and certainly that's research with impact, perhaps not for a good reason when it's driven by an Excel error. So we want to avoid those types of mistakes. And my message to you today is, if we're disciplined, if we follow a disciplined approach in our research, we can hopefully avoid these sorts of mistakes and do great work all at the same time. So what to do? So for me, when I think about what I took away from my big project as my dissertation, what I learned, I'm going to try and see if we can't fix this voice thing here. So just maybe text me if this is going to be better or not. So I kind of look at our role as scholars to include 3 parts, maybe, that we don't necessarily always think about. First is this idea of being a project manager. We need to make sure our projects move forward. Second, we run statistics, at least those of us who are doing quantitative studies. If we're doing quantitative studies, we are basically computer programmers to a degree, that we write code to get our statistical models to run, to manipulate our data into the formats that we need, merge data, all of those sorts of things. And then finally, we have to be quality assurance manager for our work. No one's going to look over our shoulder and make sure we're doing everything properly, that our results are true compared to the claims that we're trying to make. So we need to be on top of that part as well. So I want to just touch on those briefly. So the first item is this idea of project timelines, and being a project manager. Project manager, your job is to make sure the project is delivered on time and according to plan. And so really here you have to start thinking about, as a doctoral student in particular, let's work backwards from the end goal. And so on this slide here, I've got a picture of the sort of the timeline, one of the timelines actually I worked from during my dissertation. And so rather than start here at the beginning, though, in terms of proposal defense in January 2010, I prefer to go down to the bottom and say, well, gee, you know what, I wanted to graduate sort of at the normal time, the end of my 5th year in May of 2011. And so let's work back. What are the major milestones we can put on our schedule? So many schools, you actually need to defend your final dissertation several months before graduation if you want to graduate on that date. So at Penn State, it was early March. Before spring break, you needed to defend your dissertation. And then, well, what does that mean in terms of getting revisions to your committee? Probably sometime in early February. Finish up your analysis and writing by the end of January. We can go back from there. But other major steps are when we're on the job market at the start of the 5th year, in the September timeframe, we need to have initial results to talk about, to make us attractive, to make the hiring schools think that, gee, this person will actually be done with a publishable or potentially publishable dissertation that's going to get them onto the process of getting tenure quite quickly once they're hired. So we can plug these things into the schedule, and then all of a sudden we now have some structure to work within, which I think as a doctoral student, and this doesn't change once you become an academic, we want to be creating deadlines and timeframes for ourselves. So as one example, thinking about how this might apply later in our career, one of the best bits of advice that I was given was by a very senior scholar who said, once I became a professor, I committed to sending a brand new, net new project to each of the major conferences in the strategy area, so Strategic Management Conference and AOM, each year. That means I was at least starting 2 new projects a year while tending to all of the ones that linger and take multiple years to finish up. So creating these milestones in your schedule and managing to them will help keep you disciplined as well. So beyond that, there's some other things about being a project manager that's important to your work as well, and that really comes down to organization and traceability. Who worked on what? Where did the data come from? How are we doing against the plan? And most importantly is, can I generate these results again when I need to? Or if I need to gather more data and redo the analysis, can I do it in an efficient way and not take up a lot of time while doing so? And here it's really important to make this point that you are going to have to do your analysis again on most of your projects, because when you submit that paper to a journal, the best you're going to hope for is an R&R. And guess what? When that R&R comes back, someone's going to ask for a control variable or a bigger sample or some different type of analysis. So you want to have a codified way of making sure that you can repeat this analysis over and over again. And so to me, that leads to this idea of being a computer programmer. And in the case of being a computer programmer, what we want here is every bit of data that you touch, every bit of analysis that you do, every transformation of data that you do, you want to make sure that it is captured if you use Stata like I do, in a do file. SAS has a particular approach. All the other statistical packages have an approach where you can capture every single step, and I'll show some examples and talk a little bit about some things that I do. And the important thing here is that what you want to be able to do is when you come back to this, you want to know where you are, what you were doing, so that you can come back into this data and effectively, very quickly, respond to reviewer comments or build on a prior project, on a new project, and not have to spend a whole lot of time trying to figure out what it is that you did. Is the data that I'm looking at the most recent data, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so, as just one example, this is a screenshot from one of the folders of all the do files from my dissertation. And so, I mean, a real basic, simplistic thing to think about is just how do I organize my files? So you'll see numbers in front of each of the files with a name: sample selection, sample trim, importing some data from Access where I'd hand collected some data, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So just making sure that each of the files that you have to run for your project is organized in a particular way. And even if you're like me as a macro scholar, then sorry, I jumped missing a slide, I think, here. Oh, here we go. if you're a macro scholar, even Words, Wharton Research Data Service, if you're downloading CompuStat files or other large data sets from Words or elsewhere, many of these systems allow you to save queries. So this is just an example of all the saved queries. I have several dozen saved queries all the way back from the beginning projects that I worked on as a doctoral student. So if I need to go back to them, if I need to add data to them when Words adds another year of data, a reviewer says, well, you know what? A lot of times pass since you initially collected that data. Why don't you add the subsequent years? Well, if I can go here, rerun these queries, bring them into my data set, rerun all of my code, and all of a sudden I have all that new data, which is fantastic. Within a particular do file, again, I step through multiple do files and do very specific things. So the first one is always open the raw data file from Words or another source, perform my initial transformations, and merges to additional data. If I need to do sample selections to narrow down a sample, I can do those sorts of things, and then save till the next step. My second file, I might look at fixing missing data or inaccurate data. Newsflash, for those who haven't figured this out already, ExecuComp, for example, has a lot of inaccurate data on CEO start dates. And so you may need to be adjusting bits of data that you download from a database that you might think is otherwise totally reliable. Re-import manually collected data and move on to the next step. So when I talk about documenting every single step or making updates to data, this is an example of Stata code, again, from my dissertation. These are one of dozens of updates to CEO start dates and other bits of data that I made. Every single one of these is documented. What I think you want to make sure you stay away from is just having this in a spreadsheet somewhere or just manually editing your Stata file with the proper information and then saving it. Because you have no idea then 2 weeks from now or 2 months from now or 2 years from now, how did that data get the way it is? Why is it different than what I downloaded from ExecuComp initially? And so having all of this in a codified standard place in your code allows you to be repeatable as you go forward. Here's another simple example, and I will get these slides posted in case they're too small on the viewer. But here in the green, it's actually a comment about section of code that I only run when I need it. But what it's doing is it's sorting my data. It's dropping all but a certain few bits of a few data columns, getting rid of duplicates, and then only keeping places where I had a missing value for when a person became CEO. Then I'm exporting this out to an Excel file and handing that off to an RA or myself so I can work on this manually and fill in these missing CEO start dates. And then this very next line here shows how I merge it back into my data, right? So if I need to repeat this process because I've added new data, I can rerun that code, redo the import. It's all codified here. I don't have to think about it. It just happens. It allows me to be very repeatable, very precise and accurate with the various steps that I'll be doing as part of my dissertation. My third file before I get into analysis often is just review and checks, and this kind of gets into the QA thing, the last thing I'll talk about. But we want to check distributions. We want to deal with outliers. On the macro side, we'll Winsorize data sometimes and other quality controls. Some of the things that I think about here would be this idea of if I calculated a shareholder return number, for example, how much total shareholder return did this company generate for the stockholders? If I'm calculating that over some period, how about I go to Yahoo Finance and compare my number with what Yahoo's reporting for a few cases to make sure my math is correct. So I want to do all sorts of things like this just to make sure, does my data make sense? And you know what, if it doesn't, I have all of the edits that I made, all of the calculations I've done, all the transformations I've made in code. I can go back and review them and make sure they're correct, where the mistake is, and fix it and then rerun anything that needs to be rerun. If I'm just doing manual edits in Excel, which a lot of people do, how do I find the mistake at that point? So the last thing we want to be doing, it's hard enough to find results in our data, is to introduce our own random error into our data sets. It'll make it even that much more difficult to find results. So the second thing that I want to talk about in terms of being a computer programmer is this idea of backups and version controls. You've probably heard this, but I can't stress it enough. Backup, backup, backup. You're going to lose a hard drive someday. If the only place you're saving your work is on your laptop, that laptop hard drive will go up in flames someday, or your laptop will disappear. And if that's the only place you have your dissertation files, it's going to be a rough day and many weeks to come. So there's lots of great services today. We all know about Dropbox, Google Drive. I love a service called Carbonite, and personally, gives you version control and some other great capabilities. But simply, there's no excuses not to have great backups. Start now if you haven't already. The other thing you want to really back up is versions of code. So when you submit a paper or get done with a major revision, save that copy of your files so that you can always get back to that point if you need to. I can't tell you how many times on a project I worked on some changes that didn't work out, and all I wanted to do was get back to the point where I was 2 weeks ago. Well, if you have version controls, or if you save every few weeks copies of your files, or use Carbonite as a backup service like I do, you can revert back a few weeks and get back to exactly where you were. It's fantastic stuff. Last thing I'll mention, and I've touched on it in other sections already, is this idea of being a QA manager. Again, this field, our integrity is on the line every time we publish a result, and I think we're going to be in an environment where more and more studies are going to be replicated, and eventually we may all be asked to post our data. It's happening in some other fields. So we need to be sure we're not making mistakes, and we don't want to be the ones in the headline having a problem. But I think if we're professional about things, if we do some of the things I've talked about in the first couple of sections, we can do that. This is a quote that I borrowed from two economics professors via a blog that I was reading about here. But this idea that every step of every research project we do is written in code, from raw data to final paper. Doing research is essentially writing software. And there are lots of people who are good at that. There's lots of books out there about how to write good software, and really it's incumbent on us to get better at it. There's actually a great debate. If you go to this link here that I have on this slide, there's actually a great debate in the comments about whether academics really can get to the level of writing code that would pass muster at Google or Microsoft, and I'm sure mine isn't quite to that level at all, but certainly I can borrow some best practices from these folks, and that's really kind of something that we need to do. But beyond that, we need to be very critical of our own work, right? We don't want to just be the kind of researcher that says, wow, there's a star in the place that I was hoping it would be. Enough said, let's move on. Doubt that star, right? If it seems too good to be true, if it wasn't there the first 10 times you ran it, but it is the 11th, what makes you think it'll be there the 12th time you run it if you made one small change? And so, be critical of your work. Look for disconfirming evidence, and question your own work. Share your work with others and let them grill you, and of course check and recheck your code over and over and over again, just to make sure that you aren't making mistakes. So that's the kind of the last I've got. I have some resources here. I didn't assign any readings up front, but here's some resources that might help you think about this idea of being a computer programmer in particular. A great resource, actually posted a bunch of resources to the Stata listserv. I'd argue anything by Nick Cox, Restata, is fantastic. There's that same link to the blog I talked about, and there's some links out to some generic computer programming for academics that you can get through these links as well. So I will leave it there, and yes, I will get these slides to whomever can post them so you have them after the call. Thank you. So I think we can do questions now.
So we have time for about, let's do 3 questions for Tim at this point. So if you would just type your questions into chat box, and Tim will be able to answer by microphone the answers to your questions, please.
I'm waiting for other questions to pop up. Somebody asked about any questions about Dropbox or OneDrive. I've always had a concern about Dropbox that if you delete a file on one computer, it'll start disappearing from all of your computers. Now, they've put a process in place now where anything you delete can be recovered for 30 days. And so it's a little better. And then you can pay a little bit more money and get a service where it can be recovered over a year back. So they are better than when I was a doc student. I tried Dropbox as a doctoral student, just didn't like what it did for me. But Carbonite, I'm a big fan. I saw somebody else say Carbonite rocks. I'm a big fan of that service. It backs up your stuff out to the cloud. from your computer. It's seamless. You don't have to even think about it. It just happens. And as a matter of fact, you get an email from them when your computer has failed to hook up for a couple of days. They'll remind you and say, hey, check your computer out. Something's not quite right. So a big fan of that. But all of these other products are getting better. And I think for most of us, Dropbox probably is sufficient these days, although I'm seeing somebody saying Dropbox is a mess. So, the key is try something and find something that works for you. Other questions? I see one here about good data file management software. Beyond what I've talked about, I've not used anything. There are some really fancy version control packages out there. When I was a computer programmer early in my professional career, there were some software, but anything I'd mentioned at this point, I'm sure is so woefully outdated because it's been 15 or 20 years since I've done that work. But there are open source version control packages you could probably check statistical do files and other things into. So the key there is just search out something that works for you, try some things. There's probably lots of open source and free things. The good thing about the computer programming community is they really embrace this idea of open source and make their software pretty cool and often give it away. So there are resources out there. That reminds me of one other thing as I see the next presentation loading up, so I'll make one more comment, is that when you're doing coding and manipulation of your data and whatnot, if you find yourself ever getting into repetitive processes or having to write the same line of code slightly different dozens or tens of times over and over and over again, there's probably a command somebody wrote that can automate that for you. And so there's in Stata, you can do net search or go to the Social Science Research Network, I believe it is. At some other places, I'll actually maybe post a few more resources in my slides where you can find add-ons to Stata that will basically cut time and basically provide a simple command that might save you hours of coding or solve a problem. So if you think you've got a problem that's unique, odds are it's not. Somebody else has probably solved it. And so it's important to kind of search the internet, search Statalist or the equivalent for the software package you're using, and look for these tools that can help you be more efficient in what you're doing. And if you can do it in less lines of code, it's less likely you'll make an error. I think that's the other big takeaway from that. All right, so I'm going to sign off on the microphone from here, but look forward to any other questions that come towards the end.
Thanks a lot, Tim. You guys are the most patient audience. I'm seeing how the participants are hanging in here. If somebody can let me know if you can hear me. My slides have not been playing nicely with the Adobe Connect, so Chris has agreed to be my Vanna White, and I'll just say to her, next slide, when we're ready. So I saw it. Right now I see a little bit of a lot of lines on the screen. Moments of glory here. So on the next slide, we can get right into the content, hopefully. So really, all I want to talk to you about today are 5 tips for managing large-scale projects and dissertations. And it's kind of like we coordinated, but we didn't. So the 3 presenters, we independently came up with these. And I think they're different but complementary. So I kind of am excited to have gone third to be able to see those and make those connections. So the 5 tips that I'll talk about are being organized, being flexible, patient, and persistent, balancing study feasibility with publishability, design and writing for success, the idea that feedback is a gift, and a bonus tip that enjoying what you do really matters. And then I'll go through and I'll have examples for each of those. So I think Tim queued me up really well for number 1, being organized, on the next slide. And as you think about that, really it's every aspect. I know some of you are dissertating and some are well beyond that. But when you think about how much time you spend and how long it takes to publish things, it's really important to be organized. And Tim talked about some great examples that I had that were similar. But I think the planning phase, that first phase, is where you should be spending a lot of time thinking about it. Rajiv also talks about how much you should read. Not read forever, but master a literature and kind of know what's going on. Spending a lot of time there to avoid problems, having backup plans, what ifs. But then also when you're gathering data, if you don't keep track of all the things that happen, what you're doing, codes, all sorts of things like that, it's really easy to think that you're going to remember that later on, but a year from now you're not. And 2 years from now, when you might have a revision on a paper, for sure you're not. So taking great systematic dated notes sounds kind of pedestrian. My speaker is off, so I'm not sure about that. I can't see the slides either. So I'm not sure what else I can do besides turn off my speakers, which are muted. I'll just go ahead and see what else we can do here. Now, analyzing, I think Tim did an amazing job of showing documentation. I think, saving the data, never touching that, keeping that pure, transforming other data sets, writing everything down, saving syntax, notes on analyses. So you should be able to replicate and someone else should be able to replicate. And I really even recommend asking someone else to replicate within your team, within your groups, with colleagues, as a way to do that quality control as well. And then taking lots of meeting notes, timelines. Again, we saw Tim showing very detailed timelines, and really treating these as living documents. So you had a plan at the beginning, and then later on something went wrong, so revise that. Make sure that you're really up and running and that you're accounting for that now you're a month behind. Everything else should be shifting, and you should be either thinking of ways to go ahead and come up with a backup plan, how you're going to get back that time, or adjust things. And then dissemination. When you're going and you send the paper off to a journal and it comes back months and months later, it's very hard to remember what was going on there. The next point, I guess, on the next slide, being flexible, patient, and persistent. So I hope you can hear me well enough for me to tell this short story. Or it's a long story across a lot of years. Hopefully I'll tell it in a short way. I approached a VP of a major retail chain, a VP of HR, and that was the first year. He was excited. He really wanted to hear about what our topic was, and so he asked us to put together a proposal and surveys. I got together co-authors. We planned it. We found all the measures. We designed the multi-source longitudinal study. And we shared those ideas with the organization in the second year. At the end of that, we were ready to collect data, and all of a sudden they had some problems with some union activity and some problems, tension, and they said there's no way we can do this survey now. So it went from, spend a year designing this, working with them, to having it be a no-go. So I think a part of being persistent is that we didn't give up. We continued to share the ideas that we designed with other organizations. And as we did that in the second year, we actually got full funding to do this study. We had a VP of HR who was excited about the ideas. He flew us into the headquarters, and we gave that presentation in the really kind of beginning of year 3. And as I was up there and as I was presenting on topic X, that is the original topic he was most interested in, it became really apparent to me and my co-author that that wasn't what they were interested in, really. So they had, like the underlying ideas, but the focus was different for them. And at that point, I just shut down my presentation and sat down and started asking questions and listening, and we were really flexible, and we just changed the emphasis a little bit. So we were still doing the study we were interested in, but maybe we changed it 20% in a direction they were more interested in. So it's not just about getting someone to say yes, but it's getting somebody to stick with you while you're going through and doing the study. So that's year 3. We're really excited. We're up and running. We're going to get these people before they even enter the organization, follow them for a year, and there's a hiring freeze. That was unfortunate. We did start to get trickles and things did start to pick up, but what it meant was our data started being gathered across several years. For each person, those dates were okay, but it took a long time. It took so long, in fact, that when we finally had the data set, we said, how could we turn kind of this negative situation into something positive? And it had been so long that we now had turnover data for a lot of people, which we wouldn't have had with our original design. So we went back to the organization, they shared that, and we were actually able to publish the study in year 10. So this was published in the Journal of Applied Psychology. But there's an example where if it was a dissertation, nobody would have graduated. If it was my dissertation, I would have cut it at the beginning, collected the data maybe, and persisted, but not for the dissertation. But it's an example of how long it can take to get something, but how persistence can pay off. And you've invested so much time. In between, there was a lot of waiting, but the actual work wasn't really dramatic in between each of those periods. So then on the next slide is kind of this teeter-totter idea. This idea that feasibility and publishability are kind of negatively correlated. And so I hear more and more people saying it's harder than ever to publish, and I think it is in some ways, and in some ways not. So if you go back and you read the Barley article and the 1990 article, it's interesting because really that was a lot of work, right? There was a lot going on. It was over time. It was a lot of interviews. More challenging designs like that, field studies, interesting samples, and lots of pilot work. They're more challenging, and I don't know if we can scroll down a little bit more, but at the bottom of that teeter-totter is publishability. So it's not because it's more challenging, but it's because more challenging designs rule out more factors, can tell us more information, are richer. They're more publishable. So while they're more challenging, there are more ways that things can go wrong. It's something to think about. You're balancing this teeter-totter between an easier design, a more challenging design, and what you're going to be able to learn and how publishable that will be. So I think that's something to keep in mind. I also went back to the Journal of Applied Psychology in 1966 and thought, oh, everything's going to be, a correlation, and it took so long to code that, and that's going to be what it is. And I was really surprised at how interesting and in-depth many of those articles were. So that's something to think about when our memories sometimes will not serve us well over time. All right, the next one is number 4, design and write for success. I think Rajiv did a great job about ideas, having them be interesting, theoretically rich, practically important. And then once you have things that you're pretty passionate about and you think have a lot of legs to them, that's when you think about the methods. Match the goals. There's not really, there are some good and bad methods, but really it's about matching the goals. So if you have a student sample, but you're looking at how recruiters who come to colleges are reacting or influencing those students, that is the best sample you could possibly have. However, if you're talking about something else like actual R&D in the lab and you have students pretending to be research and development scientists, that's maybe got some issues with how generalizable it is. So really thinking through the methods and the ideas together. And then the part that's really boring for people, but really important, is following kind of the rules and conventions. So really not pulling an idea out of nowhere, but grounding it on the history of a literature, making sure you have really, crossed your T's, dotted your I's on IRB. And then when you go to publish your dissertation by depositing it, giving it to your committee and to journals, the format, the style guide, the typos, the grammars, especially when you're in a blind review, are sending signals about the quality of your work. So those are all things to think about. And then finally, remembering that feedback's a gift. So the next slide, number 5, talks about the best time to get feedback being really early on. Get feedback on your research design. I'm surprised how many people ask me for feedback on things once they're already done, which is better than nothing, but the more you can get people involved early on, the better. Give yourself feedback, ask for feedback, and I find that people think they do this, but really what people do is say, hey, can you give me some feedback? And they aren't really, one, very clear about how honest, specific, or tough they want that feedback to be. And two, not everyone receives feedback very well. So your toughest critic is actually your best friend, because they're going to help you avoid problems on the front end and rule out alternative explanations and really push you to have a stronger product later. Then the last slide, bonus tip, and I think Rajiv also talked about this in a way that really resonated with me. Enjoying what you do really, really matters, because it makes it easier to work on a study for 10 years, to work on a dissertation for a year or two. And being organized may or may not be fun to you. Problem solving, really thinking about how can I really learn the most in a feasible way. How can I really go through all the tedious references and all the style guides? When you really think about all those things and it's something you're passionate about and care about, it's a lot easier. And so I think trying to game the system and figure out what's going to be the hottest topic is a lot less important than enjoying what you do, because you're going to live with it for a really, really long time. And with that, I'm done. And thank you for your patience with all the technical issues, and thank you, Vanna.
So it looks like
For anyone?
it looks like we have some time for some questions for our last presenter.
Hi, so somebody's asking about career and important decisions along the way. So when I think about all the ways and how long I've been doing doctoral consortiums, it's actually I've been presenting at doctoral consortiums for 22 years now. And I think there's some themes that you hear over and over again. And it's easier to say at the other end, but I've been saying it since the first year. But a lot of it, if you kind of think about management research, is about finding fit. So, you know, trying to figure out what other people want you to be and being that is different than thinking about your career, your life, and how can you find your way in a place that values what you do, and yet you're employable. So, you know, it's kind of balancing all those things and thinking through where you think you can be happy. Instead of going with, everyone will give you advice, and it's your job to listen to that advice, but then it's your job to translate it for how it makes sense to you in your life. So that would be one of the biggest career decision points. People told me, you know, you want to go to the most prestigious, most famous place you can possibly go to, start your career off with a lot of resources so that you can leave there and go to a place where you can be happy. Now, there are plenty of people who can do both in the first place, but I found that to be very odd advice. So that, again, I think is the biggest thing you can do, is look for a fit and a match, and don't pretend to be somebody that you're not just to get a job, because in the short run, that might make sense, but I've seen a lot of really unhappy people over the years. So then another question is about how to start publishing a dissertation idea. I'm kind of assuming that that means that you're thinking about, you've already done the dissertation and where do you start? If you could maybe clarify that, Mohammed, that would be really helpful. So another question is about the idea of feasibility versus publishability. So I guess I start with the ideas. What am I interested in? What are some important practical questions? I think Rajiv gave some really good examples from your own experience, from your reading, from talking to people in the industry you're interested in, and then just kind of trying those on. Do they see, you know, I had the idea once, am I still interested a week later? So that's one way to think about it. But then once I have the idea and I really know what domain and bucket I'm interested in, then I read everything I can on that topic. And from there, I start thinking about where is the setting, the context, what are the moderators that I want to look at. And so maybe, you know, it's kind of easy if you're studying socialization and onboarding to figure out that you might care about them before they start and then during the first year. But other times it's less clear and there are a lot of different ideas. But really just thinking about getting it done as quickly as possible as the basic. It's a tempting notion, but it actually in the end backfires. So my dissertation was longitudinal. I did go over the first year and people told me that was kind of crazy. But I was working with students who were graduating, so I had a sample early on. I knew that. I knew the timeline. I could get data from them over time, matching those surveys. So that was something that I thought was a design. I wasn't depending on an organization per se, so there was more control there. And I was in the end able to get 2 publications out of that. So while it was a lot of work and it took a lot of time, I was waiting for 3 months at a time in between data collections. So I wasn't working on it for a full year every minute. And that was something that was helpful in maximizing success. So that's something what I mean. It was challenging in terms of feasibility. On the other hand, it had a big payoff. So Mohammed is followed up. So everybody's dissertation takes a different journey, and it depends on how intensive it is. In my situation, where I was waiting in between data collections for people to be in their jobs long enough to collect more data, I think that would be a situation where you could do other things. I did some experiments in those gaps where I was waiting for my data to come in. And that was how I filled it. But working on a theory paper could be another way. So I think it's really about what Tim talked about with project management. Chris, should we hand it over?
Is Chris there? Is Chris there? Is Chris there? Is Chris there? Is Chris
I'm hoping people can hear me. I am back. For some reason, we seem to I am personally having a ton of technical difficulties today. I can tell you some of the questions that we
All right. It looks like mine is working for the moment. So do people have other questions for Tim, for Rajiv or I? And we can mute when it's not our turn. All right, I'm looking at it. It looks like we're losing some participants. Oh, here we have a question from Susan. And then Chris is posting a question from earlier about what's more important, emotion, cognition, and pragmatism. So I guess I'll address this first one, emotion, cognition, and pragmatism, and then turn it over to the other panelists. So, I mean, I know it's not always the most satisfying to say you love all your children the same, but I think it's really thinking about all three where you get this really powerful, rich, and robust research stream. So every study might not be the ultimate, and it probably won't be the ultimate, but if you're working in an area that you're emotionally connected to, and it really is kind of challenging you cognitively, and you have ideas on how to start tackling it, I think that's when the magic starts to happen. And I'll mute there and turn it over to the other panelists.
I'll begin and maybe just touch on, I see a question about when to stop with our dissertation. We can always do more. I'd argue that that is and this is Tim talking. I'll see if I can get my webcam to go to, I suppose. I would argue that that's part of the negotiation with your committee and something you should be sort of having a discussion about early and often. And I think to me, the important thing is you should make the recommendation to the committee. Here's where I'd like to draw the boundaries around my dissertation. Take ownership of that process. And the worst they can say is, well, no, I think the fence post should be a little wider. Or often the case, they may actually tell you, no, even that's too ambitious. Let's make it a little bit smaller. So, so to me, I think it's an ongoing dialogue. But I would take the lead and say, here's where I think I should carve out what is the dissertation, and then start making a list of all the other things that get suggested or that you come up with that are on this list that form the basis of ideas that you'll work on in the early part of your career post being a doctoral student.
I'll jump here. I don't know the best way to kind of attack these questions, but where do ideas come from and what inspires you? I think, and I'm the child of a librarian, so take it with a grain of salt. But for me, a lot of where ideas come from is reading widely. So maybe I'm reading things in the popular press, reading books, talking to people. I think the more newspaper articles, just hearing those things sparks different ideas as it intersects with my expertise and what we do in our academic journals, and that helps a lot. Also, just observing the world around me, listening to my friends who are engineers and what some of their challenges are, in terms of going. Last night I was at a community meeting and thinking about the group dynamics and the team dynamics of kind of a Parks and Recs meeting, and how that might be more effective and what motivates people. Sorry. So those are some things to think about on that one. And again, I'll pass it off.
Hello, can you hear? 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 So I'm trying to. I'm getting an.
I'm trying to. I'm getting an. I'm trying to. I'm getting an.
And so I don't know what's going on here, but let me know if you want me to keep going off. Yes, speaker is off. Can you hear me now? Okay, okay. Again, Talia and Tim are making great points. I'll add a little bit about how to get. I think the biggest challenge, if I must say, of being a researcher is actually the search for ideas. And that's what makes us entrepreneurs. Not very different from actual entrepreneurs. And so some of the ideas would probably come from the people you're working with, your advisors. What are their research problems? What are their research agendas? And you could sort of take an angle out of them, sort of an uncharted territory, and take those ideas into a new direction. That's a very productive way to do that, because
we seem to have lost Rajiv. I want to try and piggyback on some of what he might have been saying and some of Susan's cross-disciplinary work. So I think cross-disciplinary can be really tough. But again, it's this pragmatic versus really the big wins. And so I think when you get multidisciplinary individuals or within an individual, all of a sudden there's a lot more to work with. And I think the strides that can be made are bigger. The time investment and the risk is higher. And I've seen this pay off for a lot of people, though. I have a lot of colleagues who started a completely new, nobody did it before area. And after, I would say, about 10 to 15 years of starting something from the ground, you're able to boil up and get into the top journals and get into mainstream thinking. So I think that it's really challenging, and it's a lot, what I've seen of success is finding the right multidisciplinary teams. People are open and willing to learn from each other. I see Rajiv is back. I'll hop off.
So I don't know. I think I got disconnected, but I don't know where the conversation has gone now. So regarding ideas, I mean, I was just it's useful to at times to follow your dissertation advisor's research agenda, research program, and then take it in a new direction. And that way they can also help position you in the market, because in the market, a solid image, a very clear, distinctive image of who you are as a researcher acts as a very strong signal in terms of your employability. And so that's one. But that's not enough, because ultimately the market, ultimately you have the scholarly community will expect you to carve out your own distinct identity, distinct from your advisor. And that's where this choice of idea becomes so critical, that a research idea should also be a part of your own identity and not simply a sort of an extension of somebody else's research project. And there's a fine balance here. Again, this is where another, the pragmatism also comes to play. So the idea that you select should be one that signals quality and promise, and at the same time gives you enough space to distinguish yourself as a scholar, to carve out your own identity. Now, sometimes what will happen is your dissertation idea might not be that far away from your advisor's idea, advisor's research agenda, but as you progress down the tenure track, then you sort of branch out into new areas. And that's another viable proposition. So maybe for the dissertation stage, limited exploration might be more useful. More so because it's becoming increasingly competitive to get decent jobs in academia. Primarily, I would say because academia as such, and I'm making a general sweeping statement here, but if you take an overall view of academia, at least in the US, Canada, North America, main part in Europe, if you look at the top 50 schools, business schools, the top 100 business schools, markets are becoming tighter. Jobs are becoming harder. Maybe the recession still has had some long-lasting effects. So it's not easy to get jobs, decent jobs where you can get research support and research exposure. So what I'm trying to say is that somewhere going too far out, independent of your committee members or your advisors' research area, might be a risky proposition. So identifying an idea, a research idea that is closer to your to your strengths, to your current context where you are in the PhD program, might be something that at least will help you position yourself for the job market. And then once you get established in the job market, get a job, then you can sort of branch out in new areas.
With that, I hope you all can hear me. I would like to
I'm not sure if anybody heard me.
All the participants who are still with us to please give some virtual applause to our 3 very able and distinguished presenters. I personally feel like I've been running a marathon with all of these technical difficulties. So I want to especially thank our presenters today for sticking in there and for making do with what ended up being a kind of difficult session. It was very illuminating, and again, thank you guys so much. I will be posting all of the slides that I get on our website, and I will be sending out very shortly information about how you all can access the recorded session. So thank you very much.